Hey everyone, this lecture is on the ethics of care, and the ethics of care builds on the notion of caring relationships, and this is a theory under kind of feminist ethics. So it's going to kind of give us a different angle to ethics that's a real treat for us. So in the textbook, they give an example of Jared, but it doesn't have to be fictional. There's like Robert Harris, and there are other examples where, let's say Jared is someone who kind of grew up without care and without love, and through these experiences in his life, what happens is, he makes some bad choices and ends up in jail. Now, when we think about someone like Jared, and when we think about, let's say he did something wrong, like, he robbed a store or something like that, and we hear his whole story, and we see how he grew up. There's a sense in which, yes, he did something wrong, and he needs to go to jail or whatnot. However, there's a sense in which we think that he got dealt a bad deal, that something was very missing in his life. And when we think about that, and we think about your own life, and when I think about my own life, I think of the aspect of caring, and care is extremely important to the moral life. It's not just companionship, but it's something that helps form who we are. So this is kind of the idea, the initial idea behind, and the strength behind care ethics. Okay, so what it does, and this is a really cool kind of way of that care ethics and the feminist ethics perspective, is that they make a distinction between two different perspectives. And the justice perspective is characteristic of a masculine perspective on moral issues. And usually it reflects rights, justice, moral principles. Traditional moral theories emphasize this justice perspective. Also, it's usually devoid of emotions, it's rational, it's objective, things of that sort, right? The care perspective is different, and they say that it's characteristically a feminine perspective on moral issues, and that it reflects the concerns of feelings, relationships, and individual needs. And it offers a kind of distinctive moral perspective of caring within an interpersonal relationship. And the ideal model of caring, it would be like a good mother-child relationship. Now, just that's how it's kind of differentiated, and let's just kind of work with that for right now. Now, care theory, it's like virtue theory and what virtue ethicists try to do, and that virtue ethicists kind of criticize utilitarianism and Kantianism in the sense that it's so focused, these utilitarian and deontological and Kantian theories focus on the right and wrong action, and what happens is that what gets lost is what kind of person we should become, right? That principle-based theories, they're kind of cold, right? So care theorists object to universalism and the idea that ethics is about universal moral principles, right? That it's these moral principles universally that we're trying to, apply. Now, what the care theorists, along with virtue ethicists, try to show is that rules and principles do not capture the richness and complexity of morality, right? That is, these principles and rules, it don't seem to capture the moral responsibilities that arise in relationships between friends and family. So, and it's kind of inappropriate to think of relational responsibilities as duties. Like when you say, I love my wife, it's a duty, right? I mean, it's like, yeah, I should love my wife, but it doesn't capture the nature. Is it just a duty to love my wife? No, right? There's a relational love there that the rules don't seem to capture, and that's what care theory is doing. It's focusing on that. Okay. So care theorists adopt a moral particularism instead of universalism, and so what that means is that what happens in any particular context, right? Particular context, and that's where we get particularism. There's going to be, a right and wrong way to act, but it's dependent on that kind of particular situation and relationships and aspects of each relationship. So it's not just fully contextual, but the context includes relationships. So they emphasize the importance of emotions sometimes over rationality. It's not that they don't think that rationality is not important, and we'll see how it kind of will come into play a little later. But what they're doing is they're highlighting other things that have often been neglected, like emotions, relationships, right? And some emotions, desirable emotions, right? And they're morally helpful. And they don't discard reason, but it's not the basis of all of morality. So this is completely opposed to Kantianism, where it's based on rationality, right? So care theorists value relationships more than individualism. So the idea that individuals are normally completely self-sufficient and autonomous, that seems to be wrong, right? I mean, when you think about it yourself, if you're really honest, even the people who say, "Oh, I did it on my own," really? Did you really do it on your own? Didn't you have help from somebody, right? The caring parent or teacher or friend. So what care theorists emphasize is this kind of human interdependence and connectedness, and this is relevant to the moral life, right? So we are dependent on each other in many, many countless ways, and most emotional and psychological needs can only be met through relationships, right? A deep friendship cannot be met with, an object, right? Can't be met with, a coffee mug, right? And we live in total dependence on others for a major portion of our lives, like when we're children, right? Or maybe when we're older. And we seldom can choose our most important relationships. I mean, we didn't choose our parents. We didn't choose our relatives. And see, these are some of our most important relationships. So what the idea is, what they come up with is this idea of relational autonomy, right? It's not personal autonomy, but it's the relational autonomy is the idea that a person's relationships play a crucial role in developing one's personal identity and personal autonomy. So it's not an either or. It's saying like relationships are a crucial aspect of what forms us as human beings, and as human beings, as moral human beings, right? As moral creatures. So there's, these are fancy distinctions, but they're really easy distinctions. And basically, they're kind of two types of relationships that we may have. One is a symmetrical relationship. Think, each person depends on the other roughly the same degree. So think about a good friendship, right? Where at certain points you're the person who's caring for them or listening to their problems or whatnot, and they are the ones kind of needing to be cared for. And then and some other time the rules are reversed, where you're sharing your difficulties and your life with a friend, and you're the cared for person, and the friend is the carer. So these are symmetrical, right? These are symmetrical relationships. And then we have asymmetrical relationships where they're not symmetrical. That's what asymmetrical means. And that means that it's more one-sided than the other, where one is, the carer is usually more in a position of power, and the cared for is more dependent on the carer. So teachers and students, doctors and patients, parents and children. And the relationships vary in closeness, right? So parent and child relations are normally, fairly close. But, an acquaintance, or maybe initially, someone who sits next to you in class, it may initially start off as something a limited interpersonal connection. But all the relationships have this kind of quality of being, varying in closeness, right, to a greater or lesser degree. Also, there's this mutuality aspect, and where it kind of captures the ways a relationship can tie people together, right? So when you think about what makes a good friendship, right, a good relationship, well, part of it is valuing many of the same things, shared interests, right, each other, the relationship itself, right? You value, eating good food, or you value helping people, or you value the same types of things, right? Education. Shared feelings, where you're caring about the same things and caring for each other. Shared knowledge. Well, you have to have a bit of shared interests and knowledge, right? You can't completely care for someone without knowing something about them, right? At least in a symmetrical relationship. In an asymmetrical relationship, that could you can just completely care for a baby, for example. There's not but eventually that baby's going to become an adult, and hopefully there's a mutuality there. There's a shared and mutual trust of each other. So there's mutuality is a characteristic of mostly symmetrical relationships. The idea of transformation is that these caring relationships affect and change the individuals involved. And when you think about good friends and good parents, or good people in your life, they formed us. They're crucial in forming us, right? So that seems to be true. Action. Caring is not just about a feeling. I don't just care for you and it's just a lot of warm fuzzies inside of me. No, it's also to give action. So care ethics is not just about feelings, it's about action. So caring is also normative, and by normative, it gives us an answer of what we should and should not do. And what's the basic blueprint of that? In that, what are the kinds of actions and things that will kind of give us positive, caring relationships, right? That will promote that will promote caring, right? Not only that, we have a responsibility to nurture caring relationships, right? And these caring relationships can't be taught by rules or rewards or punishments, right? Caring is learned by modeling. This is kind of similar to virtue ethics, right? I know in theory how I didn't have the greatest kind of parenting upon me, but I knew in theory how I should interact with other people and things of that sort. But it took me a while. I made a lot of mistakes, and it was through caring relationships, through other people, and eventually my parents too. They became more caring as they grew older, and I learned from that, right? And it's not just like I read a book on it, right? So the care ethics is saying not only caring is normative, it tells us what to do because it kind of, what we're asking the kinds of acts that promote caring, and that would be what's right. What's wrong would be what does not promote caring. And also what we should do is things that will nurture caring relationships, right? Relationships that we already have with our friends and family. And what should we do to continue to nurture that? And also, care ethics has implications for kind of a wider social, political, economic, and global issues. So, for example, with laws, right? What are the kinds of laws that we have that promote caring instead of denying, certain actions, right? So, yeah. I mean, think about policies like even the way we look at jail and punishment. So we have a criminal who's in jail. Are we punishing them? Or if it's someone like Jared who never had care, could we implement something where he would receive care, right? And it would help him, right? So I mean, these are just questions I'm raising, that if care ethics is the way to go, then it could have implications of how we think of all these other issues, right? So that's just a way to think. They can think through it. Now, what care ethics, what they want to do is ultimately it's transformative, to transform the individual, but also society, and eventually, right? What they want is a new moral perspective. So remember the distinction between the masculine perspective, which was kind of just the justice perspective, and the feminine perspective, which is the care ethics, caring perspective. In the long run, what feminists want is a new perspective that is not just, oh, you're a male or masculine or feminine, but it's a new degenderized morality. That is, it doesn't have to. It's not divided into masculine and feminine, but there's no gender. It's a human morality that incorporates both of these perspectives, right? Why do we need justice perspectives, right? Well, of course we need it, right? Because there are justice issues. There's issues of fairness, right? There's issues that shouldn't be, that we need an objective perspective in order to show that something is right or wrong. But at the same time, we also need the caring perspective to help show the deep relational aspect of the moral life as well. So eventually they want this kind of new moral perspective. However, of course, as with all our theories, there are objections to this. One is the kind of nature-nurture problem. And I'll just kind of generalize this in a way that will capture the essence of this problem. And it's actually a dilemma. So if you're going to have a degenderized ethic, right, we're thinking about, well, where does gender come from eventually? I mean, right now, when we think about it. And usually the answer that is proposed is that it's either going to be gender comes from nature or from nurture, right? Because the feminists, what do they want to do? They want to change what the status quo is right now, right? Which is the masculine perspective. The justice perspective is the only perspective. But where does this gendered perspective come from, right? If it comes from nature, there's a problem. Because if you want to degenderize, eventually a perspective, but what if gender is, I mean, of course there's biological gender, right? But there's something beyond biology, that what maleness is, or what femaleness is. That's beyond our sexual organs. Now, if that's from nature, then that's going to be very hard to reform. Does that make sense? It's going to be very hard to change that, because nature is going to go the way it's going to go, right? And we're, trying to fight nature. Well, if gender comes from nature, that's an uphill battle. Now, what if it comes from nurture, right? Then they have a different problem, right? So if it comes from nurture, then how do we know which corrections or which reform we make are the correct ones, right? And if we have this kind of nurture assumption, if it's incorrect, then the whole reform project is doomed, right? So whether it comes from nature or nurture, it seems like it's going to be an uphill battle. However, there's this third option where, well, it's probably a bit of both. And if that's the case, maybe there's some fluidity there, and we don't have to. Why can't we go at it in a way where we're trying out things to make it better, not trying a whole new morality just right off the bat? Why can't we just do it instead? I think the feminist care ethicist can go that route, and that's available for him or her. Now, the idea of reconciling caring and justice is going to be difficult. Now, Gilligan, one of a well-known feminist theorist and philosopher, she thinks that no one can adopt both perspectives at the same time, and both perspectives of the justice and care perspectives, right? If eventually you want a degenderized morality, a morality that is both justice and caring, right? That sounds good, but it becomes very difficult. Why? Because the justice perspective places great weight on universalism. Like, for example, human rights, right? We talked about rights. Rights, every human has the right to life, right? So that's universal, right? It's not particular. So, but care ethics tends to use particularism, right? So, justice perspectives, when we talk about civil rights, we talk about it's not, certain groups of people are not being treated fairly. Why? Because all people should be treated fairly. That's a universalist perspective. But care ethics doesn't want universal perspective, they want particularist perspective. And sometimes particularism could look like a relativism. I remember we talked about relativism a while back, and that's not a good theory, right? So that's going to be a difficult challenge for, a care ethicist trying to both, bring the two perspectives together. You can take a look at this slide, but I'm just going to move on. Okay. Now, the take-home message here, I know there's a lot of kind of theoretical stuff that we talked about and some reflections that I kind of had on the subject. But the take-home message, I think, for us and for you, and is to think about how important caring is to our moral development and a moral life. That ethics is not limited to some sort of, commandments on paper, right? But ethics is not just, like Kant, you figure out the categorical imperative. Or you're the utilitarian, where you're figuring out the greatest good for the greatest number. No, relationships are important. Virtue ethics captures a little bit of this, but care ethics emphasizes this, right? So I think that's a real service they did in teaching us, right? And we sometimes get blinded by the justice perspective, and we should also take the care perspective seriously. So I hope this supplements the kind of major theories that we've covered, and also gives you another perspective on how to think about a lot of these issues. All right, I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you online.